Hello, everyone, and welcome to Let's Talk for April 2022. This is the Community Foundation's opportunity on a monthly basis to connect with leaders in our mission-driven world to learn a little bit about a particular issue or topic area and to share in conversation and dialogue and to learn about next steps. My name is George Ferrari, and I serve as CEO of your Community Foundation. We're very happy you made time to be with us here today. This gathering is being recorded and will be able to be accessed in the archive section of our website, along with other Let's Talks. So we have with us today Carlene, who is our Community Impact Associate. She's going to be managing questions, be thinking about whatever questions you have. You can put them in the chat whenever you'd like. We'll save a little bit of time toward the end for that. We do have future upcoming Let's Talks as well. In the month of May, our own Janet Kutracha, who's Chief Impact Officer, will be bringing you up to date on resilient communities and some of our grant-making activities. And then in June, we have Karen Yearwood, who is one of the co-chairs, along with Eric Rosario, of the Reimagining Public Safety Work. As you have additional ideas or thoughts for speakers or topics to be considered for future Let's Talks, you can contact Amy Levere at the Community Foundation, and she sets all of these up. So without further ado, I think I would like to very much introduce to you our two speakers. One is Ruth Yarrow, who's the Vice Chair of the Tompkins County Human Rights Commission. She's an ecologist, honorary curator of the American Haiku Archives, and she's also served with Physicians for Social Responsibility for Nuclear Waste Cleanup and the Fellowship of Reconciliation on Peace and Justice. And then we're very proud and very happy to have a board member of Community Foundation, Peyi Soyinka Airewele, who is also the chair of the Human Rights Commission here. And Peyi is a professor at Ithaca College, an ordained minister, and president of the African Women's Initiative and the Verity Women's Network. So we are very happy and excited to have both of you here. We'll turn it over to the two of you. I know you have a presentation for us, the PowerPoint, and thank you all for joining us today for an important conversation about a topic of great interest, human rights.
Thank you so much for having us. Thank you for the great work that the Community Foundation does. The protection of human rights continues to be a desperate struggle, both here in Tompkins County and elsewhere in the world. So both Ruth and I just want to share a few thoughts with you and engage a conversation about these pressing needs and the work of the Tompkins County Human Rights Commission, which was established by the Tompkins County Legislature under a New York State Act providing for human rights commissions throughout the state. We work in close collaboration with the separate Office of Human Rights, headed by Dr. Ken Clark, and I will let my colleague Ruth share some of the work that we do.
I'd like to note that our commission builds on what has been happening here in the county for many decades, with many strong members of the population here that supported the commission. After a painful period of conflict between the legislature on the one hand and the Office of Human Rights and the Human Rights Commission on the other, our commission was reconstituted in January 2019, and we spent most of that year rebuilding trust and revising the bylaws. We were officially launched in November of that year. And since then, there have been 19 residents of the county that have served on the commission. So as you listen to us, think about if this is something that you would be interested in doing, or you know someone who might be. I'll just tell you briefly about some of the things that we've done in the 2 years that we've been active. Since we were launched right as COVID broke, we spent time considering what the virus has done to our county in terms of domestic violence increase, the troubles with child abuse, food distribution, the vulnerability of incarcerated people. We solicited input from the police department and the sheriff's department on safety in the county and issued statements opposing the racist violence and injustice in this country and on local police violence. An example of a small step toward human rights that we could do is that the sheriff's office needed help translating their complaint forms into many languages, and we were able to connect them with Open Doors English. We listened for complaints. Someone brought a complaint about racist graffiti on one of our bridges, and we forwarded that to the police department, followed up on it. There were complaints from incarcerated people in our county jail, and we followed up with that with the sheriff's department. We support community efforts on racial justice. For example, the Rural Racial Justice Network put out a very clear, good brochure on anti-racism, and we sent them statement of support. And the Dryden Groton Plus Human Dignity Coalition came out with opposition to selling Confederate flags in Groton, and we supported them. We urged the legislature to support legislation that we think would help all members of the county. So in this year and last year, we urged them to make a resolution to support the New York Health Act, and they have done that. Very strong resolutions. We educate young people about human rights. Currently, we're distributing pamphlets about what human rights are that come from nonprofits that support human rights. So we're reaching out to all the grades at grade schools and the high school. And we recently led 4 workshops at the Lehman Alternative Community School. We honor those in the county who are human rights proponents. We were devastated at the loss of Kirby Edmonds, issued a statement honoring him, and we had a small dinner to honor Leslie McBean at the end of last year. And we hope to revive that tradition of honoring people publicly. Personally, I really value working on the commission. When you think about our community, it's pretty divided. When you think racially, when you think about our congregations and where we live. And I find it really refreshing to volunteer on a commission where we're all focused on human rights. We would also appreciate any thoughts that you have about what we should be working on that I haven't talked about. And it's over to Peyi.
Thank you, Ruth. One of the questions we often face is the question of why do you bother talking about human rights, since it has not prevented the horrific realities that we face at a global level, nationally, and right here in Tompkins County. And I think this misses the point of human rights as an ongoing intergenerational struggle against abuses of power. I think we must also acknowledge the success and the significance of establishing norms of social expectations at a time when abuses are so prevalent. Henkins puts it really well and says, even if it be hypocrisy, it is significant, since hypocrisy, we know, is a homage that vice pays to virtue, because governments today do not feel free to preach what they may persist in practicing. In March earlier this year, I listened to Ukrainian President Zelensky. He gave a heartbreaking speech to the EU Parliament, begging them, and I'm quoting from what he said, I don't read from paper. The paper phase is over. We're dealing with lives. Without you, Ukraine will be alone. We've proven our strength. We're the same as you. Prove that you will not let us go, then life will win over death. His cry that they were the same as the rest of Europe, for me, was really tragic reminder of why we fight for the recognition of protections for all people, irrespective of their identity, and for the human rights to life and to peace, whether it is against Russian troops and tanks bombarding Ukraine, or US troops in Baton Rouge, as the picture of the rest of, in 2016, of Black Lives Matter, Aisha Evans reminds us. In 2020, we were also reminded about the differences that we make in terms of race. Jenny Edkins says the modern state is a contradictory institution. It gives a promise of safety, security, and meaning, alongside a reality of abuse, control, and coercion. The same state that barricades against citizens calling for an end to police brutality might encourage a mob to take over its parliament and its capital. And this is what Mbembe calls biopower, the sovereign exercise of the power to determine who may live and who must die. That power separates people into categories and subcategories, establishing boundaries between some and others, and the condition for the acceptability of putting to death. And that condition might be about race, it could be nationality, it could be gender, it could be social status, it could be sexuality. And so when we rally, regarding aggression in Ukraine and by Russia, it's important for us to also cast a glance at home, whether home is here in Tompkins County or elsewhere in the US. We remember the disparities that we are fighting against. And I believe a struggle and a victory for human rights right here in our community is a victory globally. Jeff Cohen reminded us, and he's my colleague at IC, he says, as we rally to support Ukrainian civilians against aggression from Russia, let's do so with the understanding that imperialism should always be opposed, that all civilians, victims of wars and violent coups are worthy, whether they are Iraqi or Honduran or Ukrainian, and that all criminals who violate international law should be held accountable, whether they're based in Moscow or Washington, DC. Human rights law, which is what we try to uphold here, gives us a framework for claims and for holding authorities accountable. In Tompkins County, my dream is that we might overcome these historic divides to build a community vision of an equal and shared humanity. But we know our county is not a paradise. Most people do not believe, as Shestak says, that the fact of our equal and shared humanity should take precedence over every other consideration of identity and status. I feel we have a role in ensuring that everyone in this county can access and protect their rights and their dependents, whether they're elder parents or children. In the COVID era, we've had a lot of problems with fair and affordable housing, rural poverty, racial discrimination, the loss of trust in our police force, workplace discrimination, domestic intimate partner violence, and so on and so forth. Much of this has worsened. I have been personally involved in helping county residents work on some of these issues, and the task ahead is enormous. It is simply enormous. So I think that one of our most pressing projects is to really equip each child in the county with the knowledge of their basic rights. This is our future generation. I'm glad that we were able to partner with that wonderful organization, United for Human Rights, that Ruth mentioned earlier, to distribute their booklets to every 5th and 10th grader in the county. And we hope eventually to reach every single child in the county. We've had wonderful conversations with the principal at the Ithaca High School, the Global Studies team, 5th grade teachers, Belle Sharman, Ruth and I, and Our colleague Peaches and a friend, Lady Ajayi, gave 4 workshops on human rights to the students at LACS during their infusion week. These young people and their teachers are all the encouragement that we need to keep going. They're all the encouragement that we need to keep going. In one of the polls, the students prioritized, this is what they told us, freedom from discrimination, freedom of expression, the right to asylum, the right to an education, and the right to social welfare, including healthcare, are things that weighed on their mind. We can see when we looked at the classrooms, the incredible weight that teachers are carrying today and how much support they need. They are teachers, they're counselors, they're emotional support and guidance managers. And the statistics in our county are quite alarming. Children from economically disadvantaged homes range from about 30% in the Lansing School District to 64% in Newfield. Young people with learning disabilities range from 11% to about 20% in some school districts in our county. So in conclusion, before we go into the discussion, we just want to encourage us to think about how the challenges we face are global, as we call them. They are global and they're local, and the solutions must also be global and local. We need locally relevant solutions for the eradication and elimination of conditions that foster human indignity, violence, poverty, and powerlessness. We must also look outward. For instance, in rethinking public safety, we can learn, for example, from the African courts on human rights, on human and people's rights, because these are societies that have had to balance trilateral systems of justice, including the customary, statutory, and religious laws. We can also look to strengthening the Violence Against Women's Act in the US with the global human rights laws on the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. Human rights laws have an impact on our lives, and that's our message. Global human rights mobilization helped to guide the US through the COVID pandemic. Our environmental struggles are part of environmental intergenerational rights that guarantee the survival of another generation. And so the Human Rights Commission is seeking actively new commissioners. We hope you will consider joining us. And we're also looking to work with agencies and individuals in the community, supporting your efforts in any way to help us to further human rights in our county. The rest of the slides, which I think Amy will help us to post online, include resources that might be useful to anyone, also links to the Human Rights Office, to various agencies in the county, and to other organizations that I think might be useful to support our struggle for human rights. So thank you, and I'm looking forward to hearing from everyone on how you think we can move forward in the county.
Peyi and Ruth, thank you so much for combining an incredibly comprehensive overview with an optimism and aspiration for doing more and better with some very clear next steps. It was a wonderful collection of all 3 of those things. Carlene is looking at our chat where you can put questions, resources. Amy's been putting links in the chat as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Carlene now, who's going to manage some of that question and answer back and forth with Peyi and with Ruth. Carlene, it's all yours.
Yeah, and thank you so much again, Peyi and Ruth. That was honestly really inspiring to hear about the different opportunities locally, like you said, that work toward uplifting human rights. I for one, really loved it and appreciated it. And there is one question in the chat right now, and it says, where does stable housing and human rights intersect? Locally, we have many household youth, and what can the commission do to support the most vulnerable members of our community?
That's a very good question, and I don't have an answer to it. But I think we can continue to support efforts in the city and the county to build more housing. And it's, we're looking again to you for ideas about what a county commission could do. You know, we can make resolutions, we can urge the legislature to pass things. So that's what we're able to do.
If I could add to what Ruth said, I think it's a wonderful question. Actually, one of the slides I didn't show, the next slide, actually is about your right to fair housing. So the right to shelter and housing is a fundamental human right. It's guaranteed under the basic Affirmation of Human Rights, but in several other human rights documents. As far as the county is concerned and New York State, what they have focused on is the concept of the freedom from discrimination when it comes to housing. That is not adequate. It's not enough to guarantee against discrimination. The question is, how do we ensure it's both stable, accessible, affordable, and safe? These are additional issues that is going to require the work of several agencies coming together to say housing is not a privilege, it's an entitlement. Safety, without safe housing and affordable housing, you cannot guarantee life and security or well-being. And so right now we have to move from the idea of freedom from discrimination in housing, which the Office of Human Rights will help anyone in the county. If you've been a victim of discrimination in housing, they will help to ensure that they can work with you to prevent that and to address the violation. But the next step, like I said, is affordable housing, access to adequate housing and to safe housing. And we're not yet there. It's going to be a lot of work. And I think the commission wants to work with other agencies to make that happen.
And as
I'm
Neoma points out I'm sorry, Ruth, go ahead.
I'm seeing a good suggestion in the chat that we fund a youth shelter as a start, and that's something that we should be looking into. Thank you. Keep suggesting.
Yes. It's important for us to understand that human rights manifest themselves in documents like budgets, which are at a very core level, moral documents. How do we decide to allocate resources to achieve the goals that are part of a human rights agenda? Budgets are a very important process, part of that.
That's an excellent point, actually. And I think a lot of people forget that human rights are very political and often need a lot of mobilization and community attention, where we can hold policymakers accountable for what goes into the budgets.
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody, for answering that question. And I have another question from Nancy Porter, and she says that Kirby and Lauren were instrumental in promoting the UN Declaration of Human Rights and education about the lack of US policy affirming this declaration. And she said, she's asking, how have our county and New York affirmed the UN Declaration of Human Rights?
That's another good question. And with our efforts to educate all the 5th graders and 10th graders in the county, that's one small step towards that. But it's when we did the workshop at LACS, Peyi brought a very good short 5-minute film that quickly listed some of the human rights in that declaration, but went on to say that it's a far cry from what we really have. And that's what we found these students at LACS were struggling with, that they're feeling, even in that school, which is so affirmative of children with different backgrounds, they were feeling the problems of being dissed, as they would say, in one way or another. So it's a huge problem, and something that maybe we could, I don't know how much words help in having another declaration from the Common Council or the county legislature, but we'll try to keep pushing to make sure that all the young people are exposed to this. Peyi?
If I could add to it, it's a national problem. It has to do with the sense of US exceptionalism, I'm sorry to say. The United States has not ratified numerous human rights documents. Our record is pretty pitiful. And so New York State and the Tompkins County have done a good job in affirming. They're certainly signed on to the UDHR, but the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is a very basic affirmatory document. It is the conventions that matter. And that is the process we call moving from affirmation to ratification, where we then decide that we will make policies and laws to act upon that affirmation. That process is where the politics of the US prevents it from ratifying documents. I'll give you examples. The Convention on the Rights of the Child, the United States and Somalia were the only two countries that have not ratified that document. Even though that convention was started by an American, the interest of our corporations made them hold back from ratifying a convention on the rights of the child. And that's just one example that the United States refuses to do that. So when the government itself does not ratify some of these conventions, it makes it difficult for local authorities to actually implement them. So I think we have to be more aware. We have to create a greater awareness in the community about the significance of the refusal of our governments to participate in conventions that protect us, like CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. The US says it has an alternative document, VAWA, but when President Trump, for example, delayed re-signing VAWA, then we were left in a vacuum. And so it's really important for us to realize that we're not as protected as we imagine that we are. And those protections mean that when you travel elsewhere, you avail yourself of the human rights provision that is signed at a global level. So we have to also reinforce making sure that our governments, the US government is willing to ratify some of these treaties.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you guys so much for answering that. We have a lot more questions and comments in the chat. Yeah, wow. Everybody has such great things to say. Like Joanna Green said that she really loves working with you, Peyi and Ruth, and all the other commissioners, and how inspiring you all are. Such a sweet comment. And there's another question that says, what role can literature and performance arts play in fostering a racially just society?
I think it's the most powerful. I grew up in a theater household, and across the world, the arts, music, performance goes to the heart. It's the narrative power. It's the center of human rights. Human rights centers the human experience. The art is essential as the instrument for bringing out the human being from outside the statistics. The arts allows us to see the human behind what is blurred in the data. And so without the arts, it's the power against atrocity. I think we need to do more investment and support in the arts. And it is also where people heal from trauma. It's a long process of recovering and allowing people to be empowered to hold on to their human rights. So I cannot even imagine separating the arts and literature from our knowledge and understanding of human rights. It is the center of human rights struggles.
I'm seeing a comment here asking if we see a link between voting rights, voter education, and human rights. Clearly, that's something that's very important. And I worry that the civics classes that we used to have in high school are seems like they're curtailed, that we really need to push young people to be active civically. And maybe that's something we should take seriously. I noticed that Barbara Regenspan had a thought that she'd like to express. Is that possible?
Sure.
Go, Barbara.
Oh, okay. Yeah, just very, very briefly. What I keep experiencing when I advocate for anything very specific in the city, like for instance, not building a particular new luxury housing venture, what I keep finding out is that I come in contact with people I respect on Common Council or in the legislature who give me very technical information about why I'm being unrealistic in terms of budgetary need. And this is, my comment is actually following up on a series of excellent comments made earlier. I'm not saying anything original, but I just want to skew it in a particular direction, that I think we need more of a chain of people from understanding the technical limitations that the technocrats are operating under, and the people who see the bigger vision. But you need a tighter chain. Does that make any sense? Of information, of the levels of information about what the next change has to be to make the next incremental change possible.
Mhm. Thank
And
you so much, Barbara, for
it's
that.
a very long discussion, and I don't want to take up too much time.
Well, these discussions are so important, and I think what I'm taking from this opportunity to begin some of those discussions, or to have an opportunity to learn about some resources, is that this is a lifelong, it's a commitment to lifelong learning and relationship building, to focus on what we need to learn about human rights, how we strategize about the community organizing aspect. I think partly what you're talking about here as well, and how we can support each other, because this is not easy work, but it's clearly vital work and important work and rewarding work. So we do this work in community with one another. Part of why the Community Foundation is focusing on these issues as well is we come at philanthropy from a community lens, right? And human rights, it makes sense to us that it would be from a community lens as well, not an individualistic lens. So thank you for your comment. These Let's Talks are somewhat frustrating in that just when we get going, we think, but this is a pause button. This is not a stop button. This is an opportunity for you to, here's a call to action. Somewhere between now and the time you rest your head on your pillow tonight, mention to someone that you were here at this gathering, that you learned something, and share with them next steps. And here's an opportunity to kind of keep it going. I will give to Ruth and Peyi an opportunity for last words and summary before we close our time together, to reopen it at some point in the near future to keep doing this important and virtuous work that we need each one here to be involved with.
Just an appeal to contact the Tompkins County Human Rights Commission, as you're doing in the chat, with things that you think we should work on, and to volunteer for it yourself if it interests you.
Thank you, Ruth. And Peyi.
Thank you all for taking the time to come. When I came to Ithaca 20 plus years ago, I didn't think I would stay. It was a cold February, winter, dreary day. And then I found a community that actually wanted to transform and had so many people that were willing to engage. And I found myself staying and staying. So let's join hands and keep pushing forward to make the changes that we want to see in this community. I'm looking forward to seeing everyone again and wish you all the best. Thank you.
I want to thank everyone who took time to be with us today. Thank you for your commitment to human rights, the work you're doing out there, the work our Community Foundation is dedicated to engaging with you to help use the resources, information we have to guide your philanthropy, which in some ways can be an expression of taking the resources that we have the opportunity to direct to advance greater human rights. I want to thank in particular Peyi and Ruth, Carlene, and all the staff at the Community Foundation. This recording and the PowerPoint will be on our website by the end of today. Our next opportunity to join together will be May 16th. Do I have that date? No, May 10th with Jenna Quatratra, our Chief Impact Officer. And remember that call to action. Between now and the time you go to sleep tonight, share with someone something you learned and perhaps this recording and more information so that we can keep expanding the network and the beloved virtuous community that's dedicated to doing the ongoing important work of human rights work. Thank you all.